from Abuja.
It's all about the human struggle to raise the level of living. That's what it's all about. I'm Magnus Paco, and this is Magnus Paco GVA. I appreciate your being a part of our show. In view today, leadership in a complex organization. To discuss this, we have the renowned Professor John Adair, a foremost international authority in leadership. But before that, in our quick view, the shale oil revolution and its impact on Africa. That's coming right up. Shale oil is apparently the next energy revolution, with the promise to greatly increase the supply of crude oil worldwide. Consequently, an increased production of shale oil should reduce oil prices, as the evidence is beginning to bear out. Shale oil is produced when organic rich sedimentary rocks, called oil shale, are mined into liquid shale oil. Over the past 4 years, U.S. oil production soared by 30%, and U.S. oil imports from OPEC members fell by 26%, as hydraulic fracturing and horizontal drilling enabled energy producers to tap previously inaccessible shale oil resources. In May, domestic U.S. output of crude oil exceeded imports for the first time in 16 years. The U.S. Energy Information Administration now estimates that the country holds 58 billion barrels of technically recoverable shale oil. This is an astounding amount that can significantly impact the global industry. In 2012, U.S. oil production grew by 1 million barrels a day, faster than in any other country in the world. U.S. imports from Nigeria were more than halved to 403,000 barrels a day in March 2013, from 913,000 barrels a day in March of 2011, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Already, ripples from the shale revolution in the U.S. have forced Nigeria, Algeria, and others to redirect their oil exports to Asia and other markets. A question now being asked is whether OPEC is still relevant. Well, as long as the shale oil phenomenon is still a North American thing, OPEC is safe. It is when other countries, including Russia, China, Australia, and Argentina, that have large shale oil reserves start significant production to flood the market, that OPEC will really need to run for cover. Shale oil production is still relatively at an infant stage in many of these countries, although many of them have significant reserves. Russia is ranked to have the highest amount of shale oil reserve at 75 billion barrels, while the U.S. ranks second with 58 billion barrels. China is third with 32 billion barrels, and Argentina ranks fourth with 27 billion barrels. In Africa, Libya, which ranks fifth globally, has the largest reserve of shale oil with 26 billion barrels of reserves, according to the U.S. Department of Energy. The shale oil alternative is a significant potential threat to economic growth and development in Nigeria, whose ability to dodge the results of a sharp drop in oil prices is limited. However, a drop in oil prices will be a boon for non-oil producing African countries. We will soon do a full discussion on this. Still in view, leadership in a complex organization. But up next in our hidden economics, intersection gridlock, poor courtesy, and no trust. In many countries, it is common to see reckless and impatient motorists engaging in absolute disregard for one another at road intersections. Some cities well known for bad driving include Nairobi in Kenya, Mumbai in India, Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, Bangkok in Thailand, and Caracas in Venezuela, to mention a few. According to the United Nations, the top 5 countries with the best drivers in the world are the United States, Germany, France, Italy, and Australia. Generally, impatience is the #1 reason for a driver's bad driving attitude, manifested in the disregard for traffic rules and overspeeding. But at intersections, that gridlock is often caused by poor courtesy. Now, what is at the heart of the poor courtesy at unregulated intersections? It is lack of trust. The explanation is similar to what economists describe as a prisoner's dilemma, when typically 2 criminals don't trust each other to stick to a story when they are separated and are being interrogated. If they could just stick to their denial, no matter the incentives given to them separately, they would both go scot-free. Unfortunately, these are criminals and can't trust each other to stick to their denial. When incentives are offered, they could reduce the penalty for confessing if the other criminal does not confess. Therefore, they both confess and get a stiffer penalty than if they had denied. I get to an intersection and see an opportunity to grant the courtesy of passing to the driver who may have just got there before me. But I'm unwilling to do so because I don't trust that the next vehicle behind him, and indeed the entire train of vehicles following him, will reciprocate the courtesy. Therefore, I refuse to offer the courtesy myself. Since every driver has this trust, they all fail to offer courtesy. The end result is therefore intersection gridlock. And this typically leads to arguments, fights, accidents, costly repairs, or even worse. A little courtesy and trust and not drive out can be less costly, assuming fuel prices are normal. Our hidden economics for you. Today, the world is truly a global village. Compared to just a decade ago, the speed of global communication and interaction is extraordinary. Globalization is dissolving borders and making it more complicated to lead organizations. Recently, we had in our studio Professor John Adair, a foremost international authority in leadership, to discuss leadership in a complex organization. Professor Adair is a senior lecturer in military history and also an advisor in leadership training at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. Professor Adair is a founder and pioneer of the Action-Centered Leadership Program, which he has used to train over 1 million managers worldwide. Please join me in my discussion with Professor John Adair. Now, Professor Adair, we're very happy to have you in our studio. And now you're one of the world's leading authorities in the area of leadership and leadership development. I want us to just look just a little bit at what I call a complex organization.
Yes.
The whole idea of trying to train people for leadership in a complex setting, in a complex organization such as, say, in Nigeria.
Yes.
You know, where there are complex issues like issues concerning ethnic divide, cultural divide, religious divide, and interest divide. Yeah. Now, all of these things are things that characterize a place, an organization such as Nigeria. Yes. And you are here talking, that you were talking to people, as you said, the last couple of days. What would you tell leaders that are involved in leading an organization such as in Nigeria that I believe is complex in many ways?
It is complex, and in a way Nigeria is a kind of microcosm of Africa with, over 500 different ethnic groups in Nigeria and languages and so on. But if you look at my particular role at the moment as the United Nations Chair of Leadership, when I speak in a week or two's time to a United Nations audience, and I've done this for 5 years, each of those audiences will be made up of different individuals from all 192 members of the United Nations, and each of those will be working in a country not of their origin. So you see the complexity
Absolutely.
of Nigeria is reflected in the complexity of the United Nations. And what I am involved in as a teacher of leadership is to see that you should not let complexity overrule the fundamental simplicities of leadership, because human nature is the same wherever we are, and that there are certain fundamental elements in the generic role of a leader in any context, in any field, and it is of the nature of good leaders to be able to find a simplicity, not simplistic, not superficial, but a fundamental simplicity, just as Einstein did in science. And I see the generic role of leader now as being universal, and it has 3 overlapping elements: the common task, the need to be held together as a working unity, and the needs which individuals bring into the picture. And those interact, and the role of a leader is to enable those 3 circles to be met.
Yeah, because I think where you have those 3 circles in your action-centered leadership, the idea of tasks, the individual, and the team. Now, since this is a global show, I want to take you back just a little bit.
Sure.
When Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister of Great Britain,
yes,
she went through a time when she was described as the Iron Lady.
Yes.
Especially as she worked with Ronald Reagan over on the other side in the United States. People thought of her as a tough leader.
Yes.
But where did that iron thing come from? Is it because of her tenacity? What was the reason she was so described?
I think in the case of Margaret Thatcher, it was her kind of unbending commitment and steely resolve to sort out very complex, difficult situations and not to run away from them, both in dealing with the trade unions and in dealing with the issues of Europe and with dealing with the Cold War issues. But there's a more general point there, that I think leaders throughout the world have certain generic qualities. And you see...
Are they born with that, or they learn that?
No, I don't think. I think they learn it. The Bamileke people in Western Cameroon and parts of Nigeria have a proverb which says you are not born a leader, you become one. Okay. And I think we are born with different potential for leadership, just as we're born with different potential for music.
But you have to go acquire the skills.
But then you have to build and develop that.
Absolutely.
And there's a whole complex, the African proverb that it takes a village to raise a child. It takes a whole complex of people to raise and develop a person who's going to be a good leader and a leader for good. And that is what democracy throughout the world stands in need of. We have too many people who are occupying roles or positions of leadership who are not leaders.
We were just talking about leadership more or less in the context of politics or global political economy.
Indeed.
But if we were to come down now to, say, business,
yes,
and looking at a young entrepreneur, I was just wondering, how would you suggest that they look at leadership in their own little business, in the sort of the global environment that we are now, with all the interactions and complexities of the world today?
The entrepreneurial leader in business needs courage, because you need to take justified risks, but also the capacity to be creative and innovative, to create new tasks, to create new products, to create new services, and to see this in the context of a wider society. So they're not just out to make profit, they're out to create a sustainable business which will employ people and contribute to the common good.
Communications.
Yeah.
How would people know that I'm a good leader? Is it by how I posture myself, the way I communicate, if I use the internet, if I use the media? How do I show people that I'm doing a good job?
Well, I
wait
think
for them to see it?
I think there is a danger, if I may say so, in a television studio, that many leaders, both political and industrial ones, business ones, imagine that they can be coached to come onto television and project leadership. And there are certain key things they need to say, there are certain things and so on. That is not going to be very effective. The secret is this, that you can be appointed a leader, you can be appointed a manager, a chief executive, a president, or you can be elected to these offices, but you're not a leader until your appointment is ratified in the hearts and minds of those that work for you. Listen for the first time that people use the word leader about you. People use it as an accolade, as a compliment when
Absolutely.
they say that. And that is something you cannot disguise. People will sense it about you. And you don't have to put it across. Again, in the Yoruba people, I think, have a saying that the tiger doesn't have to proclaim its tigritude.
Yes.
It doesn't have to say, I'm a tiger. It doesn't have to say, I'm a tiger. And if you look at where we are speaking, Nigeria is great people. The issue is, do they have great leaders? And on my second quote here, last thought, I'd like to, wearing my United Nations hat if I can, taking you back to the complexity issue right at the beginning. The second Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld, took office at a time when the United Nations morale was low, its reputation was low. The first Secretary General, Trygve Lie, had been a failure. He had only favoured the big nations. He had been useless as a Secretary General. And people began to say, is it worth setting up yet another League of Nations failure? And Dag Hammarskjöld took over, and he transformed the United Nations. 50 years ago, his plane crashed in Zambia when he was on the way to bring peace into the Congo region. He gave his life for Africa. And he was quite a lonely man, but he kept a journal, which was not to be published in his lifetime, but they were reflections to keep him on course in his own leadership role. He called it Vagsmagen in Swedish, which means markings. The English title is markings, the little piles of stone by the path.
Sure.
And one night he said this to himself, writing in his flat, remember that your position does not give you the right to command. It only lays upon you the duty of so living your life that others may receive your orders without being humiliated. Thank you.
On that note, Professor Ide, I want to thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
It's been my great
I
pleasure.
couldn't have enjoyed it
You're
more.
wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you much. Apparently, complexity is the real leadership challenge that organizations face today. We now live in a world of increasing interdependence, where everything is connected. Globalization has eroded boundaries and increased the volume and speed of just about any kind of traffic. With fading organizational boundaries, leadership is becoming more and more difficult. What country, even if homogeneous in population, is not connected with other populations? What country is not open to trade with other countries, far and near? What organization can bury its head in the sand and not be concerned with the wave of changes sweeping through the globe and often bending ideologies and long-held positions? Managing complexity must therefore become a core competency for policy leaders, executives, and management across the world. How does a leader manage a complex organization? Let's take a quick look at one recent and contemporary example. In 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first black president of South Africa after leaving jail on February 11, 1990. The leadership Nelson Mandela provided when he became president is principal in how South Africa has emerged as the leading country in Africa. President Mandela saw a South Africa that had an incredible diversity in race, culture, and demands that were all set in the context of a torturous history of agony, pain, and dehumanization for his own people. Nelson Mandela knew that to succeed, he had to simplify the problem by ensuring that every South African understood that victory for South Africa as a country was more important than victory for any one individual or group of people. Experts have argued that the primary platform for securing this type of understanding among the people is to ensure that the organization has enduring institutions and the rule of law. In addition, the leader would have to be of great character and integrity, and also to be driven by a cause. Therefore, the leadership in any complex organization, whether it be a South Africa, Nigeria, Kenya, the United States, the United Nations, or Walmart, would do well to be sure that there are abiding institutions that operate with the rule of law. And this is because complexity cannot be simplified without institutions and the rule of law. If we take Africa as an example, the 1980s was known as the lost decade, as sub-Saharan Africa's average economic growth rate was well under a population growth rate of around 3%. This 1980s period was an era of great uncertainty and conflict with unstable leadership, mostly in coups and counter-coups. Bottom line, because today's organizations face a great amount of diversity and flux in frequent changes, leaders have to be extremely knowledgeable and must surround themselves with operatives that strive to rise above the trend or that can see around the bend. The vision of the leader is as good as his prism. I'm Magnus Packel, and that's my view.